The topic for this evening is Noah's Flood. Johnny.
Well, the biggest reason that I don't accept the flood is because I'm past the age of finger painting. But there are many reasons that other people can't, such as there's biological reasons, there are physical reasons. In other words, when we take a look at the geology of the Earth, what would we expect to find when there's a global flood, and what would we expect not to find? I'll be handling the biological portion. So to begin with, cheetahs is one wonderful example to show you what will happen exactly when a population reaches a bottleneck, goes down to such a small size that there's no genetic diversity left. And this has been discussed before in some of my videos. Noah's Ark and the cheetah came out a couple of years ago, I think. And basically it was based on a study that, okay, about 10,000 years ago, the population of cheetahs went down into a bottleneck, meaning that the vast majority of the population was killed off. So you have a couple hundred individuals remaining. And from those couple hundred individuals, every cheetah that we have alive today on Earth descended from. So keep in mind, this was a couple hundred, 10,000 years ago. Now, on the other hand, we take a look at Noah's Flood, where there were just 2 individuals 6,000 years ago, or is it 4,000 years ago? So we're talking about, you know, over double the distance time-wise, and you've got, you know, what, 50 times more genetic diversity to begin with. And when you take a look at it and compare the two things, here's what happens. The study that I'm referring to, it compared the MHC proteins, which is basically it's your self, non-self recognition sort of thing. The closer in relationship two things are, the more compatible their MHC proteins will be. They'll be able to accept things like skin graft. And in fact, MHC compatibility is a major factor in determining whether or not one animal or one individual of the species can get things like skin grafts, organ donation, and things like that from others, because that's the basis of organ rejection. Your body views the other thing, the graft or the organ, as foreign, and it attacks it. Well, what happens with the cheetahs and the MHC proteins is that it was found that you can take a cheetah from anywhere in the world and do a skin graft on another cheetah without rejection. That means that there is such low genetic diversity between them that they're basically like brother and, no, they're closer than brother and sister. I mean, they're like, I don't know, the cheetah equivalent of Nephilim's parents. They're all so closely related that they can accept skin grafts from one onto the other. And I mean, brothers and sisters can't even do that nowadays in human population. So just to kind of recap, I know that's kind of a long, convoluted way to go ahead and explain this, but if a population can get down to a couple hundred individuals 10,000 years ago and have this sort of genetic variability loss, right? They're all pretty much the same. They can accept skin grafts from one to another. Yet human beings or every other species on that planet can get down to just 2. 1/50th of what was present with the cheetahs less than 1/2 the time ago, and suddenly there's so much variation. Like, no, that simply is impossible. And the reason being that when you take a look at what we would expect the universe and nature to look like if there was a if there was a global flood and everything got down to just 2 species, we would expect to find far less genetic diversity than we find today. We would expect everything to be worse than the cheetah is. Yet, I mean, the cheetah is a much less extreme example, and there's, you know, so much genetic diversity and everything else. So it's not what we would expect to see genetic diversity-wise.
Just a slight aside, Don.
Yeah.
Someone's just asked, what effect is this going to have on the future of cheetahs? Are they going to be in danger as a result of this? It's just
well, I mean, that's where evolution comes into play. There's an example of something called the greater prairie chicken, whereby the loss of genetic diversity can really kill and doom out a species. I mean, it really needs human intervention and selective breeding to kind of come in extreme examples like the greater prairie chicken, and restore the population to, I guess you could kind of say, genetic health. Because after all, that's what evolution is. It's not survival of the fittest in the sense of, you know, the more muscly, you know, where I would live and DPR would die. It has to do with the most adaptable to change. Fittest is adaptable to change. So when you have low genetic variability, you don't have a lot of genetic, what's the word that I'm thinking of? You don't have much currency to play with, I guess. If there's something that pops up where, you know, existing gene could take care of it, or if a virus came up, for example, that was specific to one type of receptor. Well, if every organism in the population has that same exact gene for the same exact receptor, well, then they're all possible victims. Whereas, in the population, for example, with humans, we've got 11% or so, or well, actually it's 4%, 11% in Europe, with variated, mutated receptors that the AIDS virus attaches to. So some of us would be immune, even if we were engaging in lifestyles like DPR that make one more likely to encounter the HIV virus. So that's sort of the role. Genetic diversity is extremely important in terms of how resilient a species is, and it almost wiped out the greater prairie chickens, but human beings were able to step in. As far as will that happen with the cheetahs, no, it's not that bad. The cheetahs are certainly hurting, and they certainly are not in a very genetically healthy state. They're very susceptible to they're more susceptible than most species to specific viruses and bacterial infections and things like that, simply because they don't have the genetic variability to overcome that. One wrong hit can completely knock out the species. So,
okay, we're going to move on to concordance in a second, but Donnie, you've been very polite to me in your and so I'm grateful for that. What you're not aware of is that 2 hours before the show started, I actually started a poll, and for those that are not aware, if you go to the poll, please vote. The question is, on a scale of 0 to 10, how gay is Don Exodus? If you have a look, Donnie, the public has spoken.
Let me tell you, I am, okay, I'm like this gay, and then you just take it like this, and that's how gay I am. 0, obviously.
All right, let's try and seek to maintain some order. Concordance.
Can I start off by giving a little shout out to Rhyme Maiden? She took her channel down, I guess, this morning, but she's back up as let's see, it's Wildwood Claire 1. Yeah, Wildwood Claire 1. So if you were subscribed, I suggest you go check that out. But I wanted to talk. They got the biologist talking about the physics of the flood. There's a lot of very obvious things that show that it's not even feasible. I was trying to explain to my daughter this morning. I mean, a 9-year-old can see the flaws in the physics involved of building a boat larger than the world's largest wooden boat in modern history. They're building it with Copper Age or Bronze Age tools, and they're packing it full of every animal on Earth. There's no way that they could have gotten things like, penguins, which aren't found in the Middle East, all those kinds of really basic things. Then, of course, the question comes, where is the water? Where did it go? Where did it come from? If it rained from the firmament, as Carl Baugh would tell us, then the heat that would have been generated would have been enough to sterilize the Earth. The volume changes. The fact that the Ark was 20 feet, I believe, above the highest mountain would mean that they were at altitudes that require oxygen and supportive life care, basically, for managing the cold and the oxygen problems. And all of this, of course, was not known to the people who actually wrote this book. But if there's ever a question of, is every word of it divinely inspired, I think you can pretty obviously say that this was not written by someone with more than a Bronze Age understanding of physics, biology, geology, and all sorts of other fields of science.
Yeah, can I just help you out there, Gordons? According to the Bible, the ark was 300 cubits by 50 cubits with a height of 30 cubits, and a cubit is the length between your elbow and the end of your fingers, which is about half a meter. So you're looking at a boat that was 150 meters long, 25 meters across, and about 15 meters high. Interestingly, It's a Superfly's made a couple of very interesting videos about the feasibility of the ark. And he has stated in one of the videos that it was in 1909, so what, about 3,000 years after the Ark was built, that the largest timber-built ocean-going vessel was ever made. It was called the Wyoming, and it was only 100 meters long. So Noah had, in Bronze Age times, a technology to build a boat 50% larger than that. And the Wyoming sank, actually, a few years afterwards, by the there we are.
DPR, can I, real briefly, I want to bring up one or two scriptural things I thought were interesting. Following the end of the flood, Noah and his descendants were granted the right to eat animals. I didn't realize that every human up to that point was a vegetarian. And the other thing that was granted to them was the right to have God decide who they can marry, and that they have to marry people based on certain godly qualities. So up to that point, one of the worst sins that you could commit was to marry any old woman you wanted to, right? And after the flood, you had to marry according to God's commandments, who you were allowed to marry. And then, what was the other one? Oh, the Islamic story is just hideous. It's terrible. Everyone who died in the flood was committed to hellfire with no hope of being, saved in any way. No one's servants would allow them. And at the very end of the Islamic, it's Surah 71. I want to read you this, just one quick little thing. They were drowned, then made to enter a fire, and they found they had no helpers in place of Allah. And Noah said, My Lord, leave not one of the disbelievers in the land. If thou shouldst leave them, they will mislead thy slaves, and will beget none save lewd ingrates. So there you go. That is justification for genocide.
Yes, I mean, there are other things as well in the Noah's story which are interesting. Noah was the only righteous person on the whole planet, and or the whole earth, and so he was saved by God. And what was the first thing he did after he got off the ark? Build a vineyard, get blind drunk, and masturbate in front of his children. But there we go.
Wait a minute. Let me. This kind of what Concordance said really kind of underlines the whole absurdity of it. I mean, there's a God, the all-knowing, all-loving creator of the universe, and before the flood, if I'm understanding correctly, humans weren't allowed to eat animals. Is that correct, Concordance?
Yeah, it was granted to him, granted to Noah's descendants that they were allowed dominion over the beasts, just as I had already given you dominion over the green plants.
Well, saying you can't eat animals and making them out of meat seems like a pretty stupid thing to do, doesn't it?
Especially delicious bacon.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
And I thought all we got was a Oren. You've been very quiet so far.